He's very intimidating, he's very aggressive, and he's one of our greatest journalists ever. Jeremy Paxman, how are you?
Not as intimidated as you are, I imagine, or more intimidated perhaps, I don't know. I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Are you a nice man in real life? I've been talking to people around the BBC today, and they all say you're quite nice.
It's a foul lie. I'm absolutely awful.
You're legendary, and I don't know how you become that in show business. You have to be distinct and you have to be unique, and you've created something with Newsnight that nobody else can do. They try to imitate you, but they don't quite do it how you do it, do they?
Well, you better ask other people, really, that. I dissent from your description of it as show business, too. I mean, of course, there's an element of that in all broadcasting, but I wouldn't have called it showbiz, no. But, all you can do, I think, is just be yourself. And I suppose I'm naturally curious, and I'm naturally, perhaps, I get fed up with people talking nonsense.
And your job is to get the truth, is it?
Well, or something as close as you can get to it, anyway.
You've written a new book called Jeremy Paxman on Royalty. This book is fascinating, and it really gives an insight into their lives, and I think it's one of the few books that is actually worth reading on royalty. There's a lot of them about that don't necessarily have any fact, and you really try and establish what's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've never had any interest in royalty. Ever since I was about sort of 13 or 14, I've been a Republican, really, and thought there was absolutely no justification for this institution in the 21st century. And I kind of still take that view, but I got curious around the time the Queen Mother died, and you saw all those hundreds of thousands of people queuing up to pay their respects to a little old lady who led a remote and privileged life with whom they had no personal connection. And I just asked myself, what on earth are these people doing? And I set out to try to get an answer to that question. So I looked at the various ways in which monarchies work, and at the end of it, I concluded that yes, it is a remote, antique, illogical, undemocratic, and in many senses indefensible institution in the 21st century. However, it is what we have, and compared to most of the alternatives, I think it's probably preferable. So I changed my view completely. The thing that makes me get out of bed in the morning is curiosity. I want to find things out, and having found things out, I want to share them with people. And that was what sort of drove me on. And having satisfied my curiosity on royalty, I conclude, although all the theoretical objections to it still hold good, it's better than anything I can think of that we could invent right now.
We know an awful lot about the royals now because of the continual scrutiny from the media. Did you actually get to learn anything that you didn't know before in terms of media perception?
Whatever Republicans will tell you, and I spent all of my politically conscious years as a Republican, and you always got to a point in argument where they would say, oh, I suppose you prefer a President Blair, would you? Well, of course one wouldn't prefer a President Blair. It'd be completely insufferable. Can you imagine what these politicians would be like, Blair or Thatcher or whoever, riding down the Mall in a gold coach? I mean, just intolerable. And I want to save them, too. I want to save them from having to sit through the Royal Variety performance and other awfulnesses. So, you want to... No, of course one doesn't want that. And you could have all sorts of other systems. When I was a Republican, I always make the case you could make it a weekly prize in the national lottery if all that the person's going to do is occupy a ceremonial kind of role. So you could win 10 million quid, or you could be president for a week. There are all sorts of possible alternatives. But in the end, the level of support for the institution of monarchy is more or less constant. For the last 50 years, it is always about 80%, 4 people out of 5 support the institution, and about 20%, 1 person in 5, thinks we should have an alternative system. And even at the time of the death of Diana, when the royal family undoubtedly did make some very big mistakes in terms of public relations, even then it scarcely changed that figure. And I think it was Tom Paine who said, one man is king because other men consider themselves in the relation of subjects. That's the key thing. They don't survive by any effort of will on their part. They survive because we collectively wish the institution to survive. So, is it worth it? Well, we are where we are. And, as I say, I wouldn't want to be born into it, but equally, I think probably most of the potential alternatives are not particularly attractive.
I've wanted to say this forever. With all due respect, Jeremy, you didn't answer my question.
Ah, yes. You and I both know that when any interviewer says, with all due respect, what they really mean is without the faintest shred of respect. If I haven't answered your question, it's simply because I can't remember what it was. What was it?
Well, the question was, what did you learn about them that you didn't know before?
Well, God, where do you want to start? I mean, the book's 300 and something pages long. I didn't know any of it before I started. The whole point about writing books, like any exercise in journalism, is to find things out. And having found things out, as I say, and that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is curiosity.
All right, listen, I'll rework my question. What was the most interesting thing you found out that you didn't know before?
Well, that's just a trite journalistic quip of such pointlessness, I'm not going to address it. The most interesting thing. The book is full of fascinating things. And I can't, off the top of my head right now, think of any particular one that I would exalt over any of the other fascinating things. I mean, it was terrific fun, for example, going to Albania to find the so-called King of Albania. It was fun going to talk to the Queen of Denmark. It was fun going and staying at Sandringham with Prince Charles. All these things fun. I wouldn't exalt one above the other. I think it is just... No, I don't think so. I mean, there are thousands and thousands. You asked me about... Have you read the book?
Yes.
All of it?
No, I didn't, and I apologise before I came to you that I didn't read all of it.
Oh, well, you mustn't claim to have read it, must you?
Have you read my biog before I came in here?
No, I've not. Who are you?
I'm trying to ask sensible questions, and you don't want to answer them.
No, you're asking damn fool questions. Go on.
Well, why don't you write me a list of questions, and then we'll start the interview again? That would be much better, wouldn't it?
No, it wouldn't. That would be much, much worse, because when you're doing an interview with someone, you should never give them a list of questions in advance. You certainly shouldn't invite them to frame the questions themselves. You should ask the question that you think the average reasonably intelligent member of the public would like to see or hear answered.
All right, then. Why are you so cantankerous?
I'm not cantankerous. What's your evidence?
What are you doing now?
Well, you're asking me damn fool questions, and I'm doing my best to answer them.
All right, let's start at the beginning. What were you like as a child, Jeremy?
Cantankerous, I imagine. Well, I mean, I was always inquisitive. But that's not mutually exclusive of being loving, I hope. I suppose I would admit to not suffering fools gladly. I'll admit to that. Is that enough?
No, it's not. We've got an hour to fill. Tell me about your school reports. What did the teachers say about you?
Play a bit more music or something.
What did the teachers say about you at school?
It's so long ago, I can't really remember. What did they say? They said, all the usual stuff. Should try harder, and the rest of it, I remember one when I was about 13. Maybe the prospect of failure will cure him of a tediously lackadaisical attitude to life or something. And indeed, failure failed to cure me of it. But no, I can't really remember school reports. School reports are there. They're important at the time, but I don't think you should take them too seriously in the overall audit of life. They're just there as a spur or an irritation at the time. I don't think they have any abiding significance, do they?
Well, my mother called me last night, and she told me that apparently one of my teachers had said Alex should be more studious and less like Jeremy Paxman on one of my reports. So this is a great day for me.
Well, you poor man. I'm very, very sorry to hear that.
I don't know what they quite meant, really, do you?
Being a pain in the arse, I should think. I've no idea. You sat there at the back of the class saying, "Why, sir? Why? Why do we have to do it like that, sir?" That sort of thing.
Well, I've never really gone along with things just because you should go along with them, and I think that's where I was misconstrued.
Well, no, I don't see... I think everything... You should always be questioning and always seeking to find out the justification for anything. So, I don't think that's you shouldn't be... you shouldn't feel ashamed or embarrassed or anything if that was written on your school report. I mean, I've got to say that. Of course I have. I would find it very irritating as a teacher to have someone second-guessing them at the back of the class all the time, but there we are.
It's interesting how every 6 months we'll read a story in the newspapers that says Jeremy Paxman has gone too far. He indulged in anger or whatever you do to get an answer out of a guest. And they always seem surprised when you do this. Is this just PR for you, or do you think the press really gets shocked by your actions every now and again?
They probably haven't got anything else to write about that day. I mean, periodically, I wouldn't have said it was every 6 months, but periodically people do say things like that, but I don't think you can take it too seriously. I think everything is everything is a matter of making it the best you can in the circumstances at the time, and different circumstances, different time. You undoubtedly do it differently, and that goes for everything from doing a 2-minute interview with someone to writing a book. Now, sometimes I'm very happy to concede. I get it wrong, of course. Everybody gets it wrong sometimes. And I find one of the more irritating things among politicians is the absolute refusal to admit that they ever have got anything wrong. I'm very happy to concede I frequently get things wrong. You've just got to try and keep plugging away, I think. And sometimes it's effective and sometimes it's ineffective. But I think by and large, if it's only once every 6 months, I suppose I was not doing too badly.
Do you think in this PR-savvy world we live in that celebrities actually look forward to coming on your show, or moreover politicians, to get in some kind of confrontation so they'll get some more column inches?
I don't think so, no. I think we don't really do the whole celebrity thing very much. Not very much at all. We do a lot of politicians. That's our bread and butter. Do they look forward to coming on? I think the better of them do recognise that it's part of being in public life, that you've got to justify yourself or make yourself accountable, and it is a means of. I wouldn't dignify it by saying there's any constitutional requirement for them to do it. Of course, there is no constitutional requirement for them to come and be interviewed. But I think the better of them do recognise that being accountable, rendering an explanation or a justification for a particular attitude or course of action is something that is part of the whole business of living in a democracy. So do they look forward to it? I really don't know. I've never ever discussed it with anyone. Funny, after all these years, I've never discussed whether they look forward to it. Never really occurred to me before. I think it's just a given, I think.
You see, I would look forward to coming on with you, but I'm not a politician, so I've got nothing to lose. For them, there is something to lose, because you can actually dig a hole that they can't get out of, and that's a real problem when you're in a position of power, isn't it?
Well, someone can only dig a hole, or someone can try to dig a hole, but it requires that the other person is ready to jump headfirst into it, and the better ones don't jump headfirst into it. So I think this whole thing is really overblown. It's just a perfectly normal journalistic exchange. Most journalism is about answering the usual interrogatives. Who, when, where, why, how. Occasionally there are some interviews that are different, and it is the case, I think, that politicians in particular have spent now a great deal of time going on courses and being trained in how to deal with the media, and they only ever come on because they want to get a particular point across, which may not be the same as the point you're asking them about. So you have to find different ways around. But I don't think that most interviews are necessarily that combative. And occasionally, of course, I do set out to dig holes, and occasionally people oblige by jumping headfirst into them. But quite often they tiptoe around the edge quite ably. And it's not really very often a very high stakes game. Occasionally it is, but most of the time it's not. It's just finding out information.
I was thinking earlier what makes you unique as a journalist, and I think what it is most people want to be liked by the person they're interviewing. For example, if the Prime Minister sat in front of me now, I'm not going to want to annoy him because I probably want to do him again. You come across that you don't actually care, you're more interested in doing a good job. Do you understand that makes you different to most journalists?
I think I'd have to be ludicrously vainglorious to take any of that at face value.
Well, try.
Well, I don't. I mean, I just don't buy the argument. I think a lot of. I don't believe that you would deliberately not ask questions of the Prime Minister or soft pedal on the Prime Minister because you wanted to get him again. If that is the case, then you shouldn't be doing an interview with the Prime Minister. And I think also that a lot of serious people actually want to be asked difficult, serious questions. Apart from anything else, they by and large perform a whole lot better if they're asked difficult questions and tested a little bit. And there is, I think, there are acts that are gone through in which people collaborate with the enemy, as it were. I'm using loaded language here. And I think the audience can see straight through that. So, do I care what people think about me? Well, I think the only thing I care about really at that level is that people think one's tried honestly to find something out. And that's, I think, the only justification for our existence really is pretty simple.
I think you're putting yourself down in a way. I spoke to a journalist this morning who does a national TV breakfast show news programme and said he admired you because he couldn't ask the things that you ask of your guests.
Well, I wouldn't use the word brave. I mean, I get very nervous beforehand, of course. I don't think there's anything particularly brave about it. I mean, there's no difference really between me and any other citizen. Absolutely no difference, with one crucial difference. I have no greater legitimacy, and it would be completely unacceptable for me to try to inflict my half-baked political prejudices upon the world. The only difference is that I have an opportunity that most people don't have. And if you have that opportunity, I think you owe it to your viewers and listeners to get an answer. I think it's a position of trust. But I wouldn't want to, I don't want to construct an entire moral justification for what we do. I think it's really pretty straightforward. I think a journalist's business is to try to find out the facts, and you must do that to the best of your ability.
When you're doing those kind of interviews, have you got something there just in case, if you need a blow question where you can just wipe them off the floor? Because it seems like in all of those interviews you've got something there that's going to confuse them or set them back so that you're almost one step ahead.
I think you're using the wrong kind of language, really. These things are not fights.
They want to come across as smarter than you, don't they?
Well, I don't think that's what the thing's about at all.
From their point of view, it is, because they're trying to get a message across and make out that they want to win the election.
But that is not the same as saying they wish to view the interview as a fight and wish to win it. Of course they wish to persuade the voter they're worth voting for. Of course they do. But they don't. I don't think that they necessarily see it as a punch-up. Now, sometimes it turns out to be a punch-up of a more or less heated kind. But no, I don't sit down and have a killer blow, but I sometimes, or think what I think might be a killer blow, but I do sometimes think in advance, well, if I ask them that, what will they say? They'll probably say that. And if I then ask them that, what are they going to say? This is the business of digging a hole. And they recognise that, and they can tiptoe around it. But that's actually, it's a quite small part of the interview. But there's the interesting things are getting them to say things, or to address issues they don't want to address, getting them to look at things that they would rather not look at. I don't know whether it be the scale of illegal immigration, or what's happened to pensions, or whether the intelligence on the Iraq war was honest or not. These kind of questions they don't want to engage with, and making them do so. Now, that involves a bit of jousting at the time, perhaps, but I don't think it is. I think it's wrong to see it as a fight.
It just seems that, to me, when they come on your programme, they know that they're up against the best, effectively, and that you're not going to let them get away with anything, and they've got to win to come out on top. I might be wrong.
Well, yes, I mean, I think it's a very vainglorious way of talking about it. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward transaction, really. I think if you start believing all that kind of propaganda, you've had it, really. You start taking yourself far too seriously.
Do you know you're different?
To what?
To other journalists, to other TV presenters, to other people in your genre?
I don't think I am. So the answer to your question is no, because, well, I don't believe it to be the case, no.
You see, I think it is, because I think anybody who would come in front of you would know that you're going to not let them get away with things that other journalists would.
Well, I'm sure I let them get away with all sorts of things I shouldn't let them get away with. So I wouldn't. I just don't recognise this picture. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be evasive. I genuinely don't recognise it. I mean, of course, you cannot be unaware of what people say, but in the same way as you'll be very foolish to believe, if you get a good review for your book, that is the only way of looking at it. Equally, you shouldn't be completely downcast when you get a real rubbish review. And the same is true of performances on television or anywhere else. All you can do is carry on doing what seems to you to be the sort of straightforward way of trying to do your job. I don't think you mustn't get suckered into believing all this stuff that's written. There's far too many newspapers, far too many radio stations, far too much television.
Just before we go, I want to talk to you about Newsnight, because it's one of my favourite programmes on TV, because it's just so slinky. It's not showbiz. You tell it as it is and you give us the news, which of course is what you're there to do. One of the things I do get from the programme, though, is how much you actually care about the programme, and you come across that you really love presenting it. Is that the case?
Yes, I do. I mean, I work here, and we're sitting here in my office with a team of about 20 people out there, all of whom are every single one of whom is a good deal younger than I am. They're all bright and they're all work incredibly hard. They get no lunch, they get no dinner. They slave away. They do things I don't begin in production terms to understand how they have pulled things off under a lot of pressure on the day. And I sort of, I care. I do care, actually. I care. Perhaps I care too much. I don't know, but I do care. And there's a part of you thinks, well, I don't want to let them down. But also, I think it's important that we preserve a bit of this, by and large, pretty stupid medium television that is not entirely preoccupied with celebrity and reality and all the other garbage that's out there. I don't want to sound pompous about it. I perhaps do sound pompous, but I think it's important that we try to stop television succumbing to the lowest common denominator, which by and large is happening more or less everywhere nowadays. So yeah, I actually do care quite passionately about it, but I'm going to get pompous in a minute, so I'll shut up.
Will you promise me one thing with Newsnight?
It depends what it is.
Will you make sure they never put those things across the bottom that go one way and then one up the side going another way and another one across the top telling you another story? I can't watch news anymore. It baffles me.
God, how did you know about our redesign? We're going to have all of this. In fact, we're going to have them going diagonally across as well.
I think across your eyes would be nice. Maybe across your face.
That's a very, very good idea. In fact, we could just go to CFAX, I think. I do think there's a big problem with part of the news culture now, which is this whole 24-hour thing, that somehow activity and vision has become a substitute for understanding. That simply because you see something, you think you understand it, and it's not the same at all. And this surfeit of information is part of that, I think.
Have you ever considered going to maybe New York to work for Fox News? Because when they come on air, for a start, they put a ton of makeup on you, and then you have to speak at 3 times the speed you naturally speak. Yeah. And everything has to sound so exciting. It's going that way in one way with some of the Sky channels.
No, we don't want it exciting. We don't want it exciting, certainly not.
Does that not baffle you, though, how when you see the American news channels, it is fascinating how it really is show business. It's no longer news.
Well, yeah, I find them unwatchable, so I'm not really. I find them trivial. I find them insular. I find them just completely preoccupied with makeup, with sound bites. I don't watch them because I find them unwatchable.
What do you like to work with? I know there was a thing a while back, about a year ago, regarding the weather, where you didn't particularly want to do the weather. Was that the case?
Rubbish. What do you mean didn't want to do the weather?
Well, I don't know. You did it in a sarcastic way, put it that way.
Yes, I did. Yeah, of course. I mean, it seems to me there's an awful lot of rubbish talked about the weather, and I think the challenge was always to boil it down to one sentence. You take an umbrella, it's good enough for saying it's going to rain tomorrow, isn't it? Or I think I said at one point, It's April. What do you expect? That's the nature of weather. But I actually would much rather do the weather on Newsnight than do the market reports, which was eventually the choice which rather foolishly our editor offered to our viewers in a poll. And for reasons I don't understand, they apparently prefer the markets. It baffles me. Markets mean nothing to me. I don't understand them, and it seems to me, if you need to know what's happened on the financial markets, you can find out, or you'll know by the time we go on air anyway. So, no, I rather wish we did have the weather. That does affect everybody. Who knows? We might bring the weather back. Got any other ideas?
No, I think I've said quite enough, to be honest.
Music, perhaps, each day.
Yes, you could play a bit of Evita just before the main headlines.
Yeah, I think I'll have gone off Evita by next week. I think that's probably quite enough.
You've been to Mary Poppins by then. Congratulations on this new book. It's called On Royalty by Jeremy Paxman, and it's in your stores now. It's very good. It's a very interesting read, and you learn a lot in it, none of which you can remember to tell us, but if you buy the book, you'll find out.
Ask me a sensible question. I'll do my best. No, it's very nice of you. Thank you very much.
Did I do a terrible job?
But you didn't do too badly. You should. If I were you, I'd give you strong advice. You came here without any questions written down on a piece of paper, and it's very useful to have a crib. I often have to refer to it now because I can't think where we're going next.
Well, do you know why I don't do that? It's because everybody tells me that if you're a genius journalist, you will listen to what they're saying and you will react to it.
Well, perhaps the answer is in the question. No, I'm kidding you. I agree with you. It is.
Don't backtrack. I understand how you feel about it.
I'm just teasing you. No, I quite agree with you. I find it really, really irritating listening to interviews when the interviewer is clearly just reading out questions, and you sit there screaming at the radio, but he's just answered that question. I agree. It's very, very frustrating.